much they talked about, mothers varied in how much they treated the babies as if they themselves had mental states. So in other words, some moms, and even some grandmoms, if Augie came to visit, even when he was 3 months old, would be saying, oh, darling, you really want to look at that, don't you? And, oh, you burped, that's because you don't like that food that you just had. And, now you're crying. Oh, I know, it's because you're so tired. And other moms just said, you burped, or you're crying, or you looked at that. So even at 6 months, moms differed in how much they attributed mental states to their own babies. So how much did they treat the babies as if they had even complicated emotions and mental states that the babies at that point may very well not even have had, but the moms treated them as if they could have this kind of complicated conversation. Yeah. Right. Exactly. That's the punchline. So the punchline is that the babies whose mothers treated them as if they had mental states, even when they were just 6 months old, when you tested them when they were 3 or 4, solved these theory of mind tests more quickly and at an earlier age. Now, we don't know whether that's something about what happened at 6 months, or maybe it's just that those were the same mothers who later on were continuing to talk about the mind. But it was interesting that you could make this prediction even from looking at 6-month-olds, looking at the way that the moms were interacting with 6-month-olds. Remember, 6-month-olds don't even really understand much language, so there must be something subtle that's going on that's telling these babies something about minds and mental states, maybe just telling them that that's important in a way that the other babies are not here. Yeah. Right. We're going to get to that. Another good setup, because that's going to be the next slide. Great. Yeah. Right. 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 Well, the general picture, we'll talk about this more when we talk about siblings in general. Remember, I said that older siblings do better on IQ tests, which, as we all know, is not the same thing as being more intelligent. So there's some evidence that in general, if you look at middle siblings and younger siblings, they're more likely to do things like become diplomats or politicians or civil rights leaders. So they seem to sort of have this social and emotional intelligence, which is what you learn from seeing all the mistakes that your older sibling makes. Whereas the older siblings seem to be better at doing the things that you need to do to get ahead, to do the things that will make your parents happy, for example. The older sibling, like doing well at IQ tests or doing well in school. When you talk about sort of doing well in life, it's not at all clear that the older siblings have an advantage over the younger siblings. Right. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that when we talk about younger siblings as well. There does seem to be this kind of personality that you see, especially with youngest siblings. So this is a kind of interesting story. In the 19th century, you have this phenomenon, which is that women have a little burst of fertility before menopause. So you'll actually often, if you're not using contraception, what you often see is a pattern where women will have lots of babies, and then there'll be a pause, and then they'll have just kind of a last gasp baby who's much younger than the others. The stories about Jacob and Benjamin in the Bible are stories about that, about the youngest one who shows up long after the parents have given up hope. And in 19th century, when you read stories about kind of life in these 19th century villages, people actually had this word Benjamins for these children because they said that they had this really characteristic personality, which was that basically everybody adored them, and they thought that everybody should adore them. So in that sense, they were kind of egocentric. But on the other hand, they also were very sensitive to getting people to adore them. So they were very good at getting people to do what they wanted, for example. I don't know if that fits the profile of your youngest sibling or not, but that was sort of the picture. So the picture of the youngest sibs are basically think that they're the center of the universe because they have all these people who have been paying attention to them for all their lives in some ways, but in other ways they're actually very sensitive to what the other people around them want. Now again, the other thing is, of course, all of this is wild overgeneralization. So you can see older siblings who are actually more or less socially skilled, not in my family, but somewhere, and you can see younger siblings who do very well and have high IQ. So this is general tendencies, not an absolute principle. Okay. Another factor that seems to play a role in children's understanding of theory of mind is language. So it turns out that there are quite strong and specific correlations between how good you are at how much language you have, how good your language development is, and how well you do on these theory of mind measures. So children who have more sophisticated language are likely to do better at understanding other people's minds. And again, it's an interesting question about what the explanation for this is. And an example that we actually talked about when I talked about the methods, but that's particularly dramatic, is that deaf children of hearing parents have particular difficulty with theory of mind, which again sort of supports this idea that language seems to play a particularly important role. So deaf children of deaf parents, that means children who are learning sign language as a first natural language, do fine. They have no trouble understanding the mind. But deaf children of hearing parents who aren't getting as much language input, even if the hearing parents are trying to learn sign, they're not going to be as good at it as people who do sign their whole lives. Those deaf children of hearing parents actually show pretty striking delays in their ability to understand theory of mind. As I said, we talked about that in the method section. Now, when we were talking about physical understanding of things like everyday biology or everyday physical causal relationships, we talked about how play seems to play a really important role in enabling children to get that kind of understanding. And remember last time we saw that beautiful video of the little boy playing with the lie detector and figuring out how it worked. And the same thing seems to be true about understanding how other people work, understanding how the mind works. But in this case, the kind of play that seems to be important is a bit different. So the kind of play that seems to be important is not so much exploratory play as pretend play. So when the children are about 2 years old, they start to pretend, and by the time children are 3 or 4, they're basically 24/7 off there in these wild, crazy, imaginary worlds of princesses and tea parties and mutant ninja turtles and all those kinds of things. And it's actually quite puzzling because you'd think that the children have to learn so much about the real world. Why are they spending so much time in these unreal worlds? And one of the most dramatic examples of this kind of pretend play in children is the fact that children have imaginary companions, they have imaginary friends. And imaginary friends are sort of, this is actually not a child with an imaginary friend, this is an adult. This is Jimmy Stewart and Harvey, which I highly recommend. Wonderful, wonderful movie. And it's about a grown-up who has an imaginary friend who's a 6-foot-tall rabbit named Harvey. So you might think, well, why is it that children, so adults sometimes have imaginary friends, but almost all children have imaginary friends. And Marjorie Taylor at the University of Oregon actually went and studied children and their imaginary friends and has a wonderful book called Imaginary Companions and the Children Who Create Them. And this is actually Margarine, and Margarine is an imaginary friend who has long pigtails that go down to her, well, depending on the picture, go down to the floor, go down past her waist. Anyway, she has very long pigtails, and she has a purple shirt. And this is the older sister, and this is the younger brother, and they both share the same imaginary companion, Margarine. And this is the sister's picture of Margarine, and this is the brother's picture of Margarine. So it turns out that something like 65 to 70% of just typically developing children have some kind of an imaginary friend, some kind of imaginary person in their lives who's different from the other people around me. In fact, when I was growing up, I had an imaginary companion whose name was Dunzer. I don't remember my imaginary friend. We rarely remember them when they were adults. But kind of like this older brother and younger sister, the story, at least as my mother tells it, is that this imaginary friend is actually an imaginary enemy. And that's something that happens with imaginary companions too. Imaginary companions aren't always friendly. Sometimes they can be hostile too. So Dunzer started out being friendly, but then he got meaner and meaner and meaner, to the point where I wouldn't go into my crib because Dunzer was sitting in the corner of the crib. And I would explain to my mom would put her hand through and say, see, there's nothing there. And I said, well, he just moved over to the other corner of the crib when you put your hand there. And I would point to the corner of my crib and I'd say, no, I'm not going in there. Dunzer's in there. So finally, my poor mother in despair said, all right, I'll tell you what, why don't you swap cribs with Adam, your younger brother, my younger brother, who was then about 1.5. And I said, okay, that's fine. Dunzer never goes into Adam's crib. I'll do that. So they went to pick out Adam to put him in my crib. And Adam looked at my crib and pointed to the corner and started saying, ah! And wouldn't refused to go into the crib either. So that's a good, scary, Jack Nicholson in in Shining, thank you. Jack Nicholson in The Shining story about imaginary friends. They can be pretty creepy. But what Margaret Teller found was that it wasn't uncommon for siblings to actually share these imaginary friends. Why have imaginary friends? Well, here's another story that might indicate something about why it is that children have imaginary friends. That same little brother, Adam, grew up to actually be a writer for The New Yorker who lives in literary Manhattan. And then he had a daughter, a 3-year-old. And when she was 3, she had an imaginary friend called Charlie Ravioli. And Charlie Ravioli was like other imaginary friends, and she would talk about him and so forth, but he had a really interesting feature, which was that he was too busy to play with her. So she'd say things like, I bumped into Charlie at the coffee shop today, but he had to run. And she would leave messages on an imaginary answering machine. So she'd say, Charlie, it's Olivia. Could you get back to me? And then she would hang up the phone and turn to her father and say, I always hit his machine. So this is a funny and somewhat sad story about what it's like to have an imaginary friend when you live in the Upper West Side in Manhattan. Why is it a funny and sort of revealing story? Well, it seems as if what Olivia had done was to figure out something about how friends work in the lives of her parents. That if you have a friend in Manhattan, then basically you never see them because they're always too busy and you never actually get to spend any time with them and you leave messages on their answering machine. One thought was that she was figuring out something rather puzzling about how the people around her worked by making up this imaginary person and figuring out how would this imaginary person work? What would this imaginary person do? You could think about it as being kind of like Einstein doing a thought experiment. So when Einstein says, well, what would happen if you were in a train that was going at the speed of light? Here's all the different things that would happen. You could think about the children's imaginary companions as serving the same function, but not for their theory of physics, for their theory about how other people work. So you might say, okay, well, what happens if you have a friend and you meet him? Well, in New York, you never see him again. And in fact, there's actually some empirical evidence that this is true. So, oops, wrong slide. Yeah, here we go. So Angel Lillard and Marjorie Taylor found that the children who had imaginary companions weren't any smarter or crazier than other people in general, but they did do better at theory of mind tests. So having an imaginary companion seemed to be related to theory of mind. And in fact, engaging in pretend play in general seemed to be related to theory of mind. So children who spent more time involved in pretend play, and particularly children who had imaginary companions, actually seemed to solve some of these theory of mind tasks like false belief, empirics, reality, and the sources tasks more quickly than children who didn't. So it seems that just as exploratory play was helping the children to understand about how the biological world and the physical world work, engaging in pretend play, particularly pretend play about people, was helping the children to understand how the psychological world worked. Yeah? Yeah, that's a really good question. So are there cultural differences in imaginary friends? And the answer is really interesting. Cultures differ a lot in how much they encourage or discourage imaginary friends, and when they encourage or discourage imaginary friends. So we think that imaginary friends in 3-year-olds are cute, but like 6- and 7-year-olds, or we think it's kind of creepy and we discourage it. In some cultures like India, they actually think that when children have imaginary friends, it's a previous existence, a previous life coming back to sort of haunt the child, and they really discourage it. And in some cultures, people think, well, it's just kind of like lying. In some fundamentalist Christian families, they discourage imaginary friends. And the answer seems to be, it doesn't matter how much you discourage them, the children just do it anyway. So if you discourage it, in cultures where it's discouraged, the children just kind of do it secretly, and they'll tell you about it, but they don't do it as openly as they do in our culture.